Hello, everybody. I forgot to turn the light on so you can see me. Hi, Lily. Oh, I don't like that thing being bold. But just a second here. I'm still learning this, so let me see. Come on. Nope, that's not there. There it is. Let me see. Come on. There we go. Go back to default. There we go. Huh. Hey, sis. No, don't. I meant to click on the. Hi, Tony. I see you. Love you too. So, it is another Thursday night. AA. So, if you're new here, welcome. My name's Sandra. I'm an alcoholic. And you might be asking why I do this. Well, when I first started going to AA, I didn't have a clue what it meant. But in there, we're taught that we need to share it out and do our service work, which is reaching other alcoholics who suffer and help the next one. So that's why I do it. Please be mindful in the comments and the chats. It's a judgment-free zone. People come here to get help, to listen, to know that there's somebody else out there, that they're not alone. And that is another reason why I do this. But regardless, just be nice to people in the chat and the comments. They're not the alcoholic by chance. They may not be the person who needs the help. They might be a person that needs help helping a friend or family member. You never know. So please don't go and harass other people accusing them of being an alcoholic. That's not okay and not right. Anyways, so like I said, I'm Sandra and I'm an alcoholic.
Get out of the kitchen.
And that is my son Mike yelling at the dog to get out of the kitchen. Ryder, get out of the kitchen. Come here. Come. Come here. Here he is. Let's say the serenity prayer, Ryder. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. He just goes like stealth mode, huh? He's like, I don't know nothing. I didn't hear nothing. You don't see me. I was not in the kitchen. Right? Right? Yes, that's right. He does this. Nope, not me. Not me at all. Not me. I's a good boy. See, I don't get in trouble. He gets in plenty of trouble. Go. All right. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over the care of God as we understood Him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Potatoes just turned my mush.
That's because you didn't have them on high enough. They're not done if you keep stirring them. Flip them
I was.
with a spoon.
Yeah.
You flip them with the spatula.
I tried.
Whatever. Anyways. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defective characters. 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. 9. May direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admit it. 11. Taught through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Sorry, my phone is not on silent. No thanks. I'm good for now. Thank you. Anyways, so if you're wondering what we're reading, I always put in the description, at least on my YouTube side, of what we're reading, the book, the page, the name of the story we're reading, and all of that stuff. Anyways, we're reading the big book, and I'm in the 4th edition on page 421, Window of Opportunity. This young alcoholic stepped out a second-story window and into AA. I got sober while I was still in college. Once outside of a meeting, I overheard a conversation between another sober student and a woman who lived in the town where I went to school. She was explaining why so many local residents disliked the students. She described the common perception of students as arrogant and self-centered and went on to tell the following story. I am a nurse and I work in the emergency room. 2 years ago, a student was brought in by ambulance in the middle of the night. He had gotten drunk, walked through a second-story window, and fallen 20 feet head first into a concrete window well. He was brought in covered with blood. His head had swollen to the size of a watermelon. He kept swearing at the nurses and doctors, telling them to keep their hands off of him and threatening to sue them. He was, without a doubt, the single most obnoxious person I have ever met. At that point, I interrupted her. That was me, I said. That was my last drunk. I had walked through that window when I was 19 years old. How had I gotten there? I'd always been a good kid growing up, the kind of son other mothers loved. I was at the top of my classes academically and had been in almost no trouble for the first 17 years of my life. I would not like to say that was because of my well-developed moral fiber. In fact, much of it was a result of fear. My earliest memories included threats by my parents to throw me out onto the street for the slightest act of disobedience. The thought of being forced to live on the streets is pretty terrifying for a 6-year-old. Those threats, coupled with a fair amount of physical punishment, kept me frightened and obedient. As I grew older, however, I made a plan. I would be dutiful until I graduated from high school. Then I would escape to college, secure my economic future, and never go home again. Just after my 18th birthday, I left for college. I thought, finally free. I was in for a rude awakening. Like many alcoholics, I had spent much of my life feeling different, as though I just didn't quite fit in. I covered those feelings and my low self esteem by being one of the smartest people in any group, if not the smartest. Additionally, I became a performer in crowds, always ready with a quick joke to point out the humor in any situation. I managed to bring a great deal of laughter into my life. I went to a college filled with people who had also spent their entire lives at or near the top of their academic classes. Suddenly, I was no longer special. To make matters worse, many of them had what I only dreamed of: money. My family was strictly working class, struggling to get by on what my father earned. Money had always been a big issue, and I equated it with security, prestige, and worth. My father was fond of saying that the sole purpose of life is to make money. I had classmates whose names were household words that can connoted wealth. I was ashamed of my family and ashamed of myself. My shaky confidence crumbled, or my shaky confidence crumbled. I was terrified of being found out. I knew that if others discovered who I really was, they wouldn't like me and I would be left alone, worthless and alone. I discovered alcohol. I had tried it a few times in high school, but never enough to get drunk. I knew that getting drunk meant being out of control. My escape plan required that I always keep my wits about me. I was too afraid to be out of control. When I got to college, however, that fear left me. In order to fit in, I pretended, at first, that I had as extensive a drinking history as any of my classmates. It was not long before my history surpassed everyone's. My drinking career was short and destructive, and my alcoholic progression was very fast. I got drunk for the first time in October. By November, people were willing to wager money that I could not go 1 week without a drink. I won and in celebration drank myself sick. By January, I was a daily drunk, and by April, a daily drug user as well. I didn't I didn't last too long. As I look back on that period, I realize how true it is that one of the primary differences between alcoholics and non-alcoholics is that non-alcoholics change their behavior to meet their goals, and alcoholics change their goals to meet their behavior. Everything that had been important to me, all of my dreams, goals, and aspirations were swept away in a wave of booze. I realized quickly that I could not drink and function at any high level. That did not matter. I was willing to give up anything so that I could keep drinking. I went from being a solid A student to nearly flunking out of school. From being anointed a class leader to being shunned as a pariah. I almost never went to class and did little of the required reading. I never attended any of the many cultural events sponsored by the college. I forsook everything that makes college worthwhile in favor of drinking. Occasionally, some sliver of pride would work its way through the chaos, resentment, and fear and cause me to look at my life, but the shame was too great, and I would drive it back down with bottles of vodka and cases of beer. Because my college was fairly small, it did not take long for me to come to the attention of the college deans. It was under their watchful eyes that I first agreed to enter counseling. While the administration saw this as an opportunity to help a troubled student, I was it as a bargain. I would go to counseling to make them happy, and they would owe me one. Not surprisingly, the counseling had no effect. My daily drinking continued unabated. About a year later, I realized that I was in trouble. I had failed a class during the winter term. I had rarely attended and had not turned in the term paper on which 50% of our grade was based. The spring term was looking equally bleak. I was enrolled in a class that I had attended only once. I had not written any of the required papers or bothered to show up for the midterm examination. I was bound for failure and expulsion. My life had become unmanageable, and I knew it. I went back to the dean who had guided me into counseling, and for the first time, I admitted to myself and to someone else that I had a problem with alcohol. I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I wasn't even sure what that was. But I knew my life was out of control. The dean allowed me to withdraw from that class the day before the final exam on one condition. I had to enter a treatment center. I agreed. A few days went by with the pressure lifted. My life did not look so unmanageable. In fact, it looked as if I was back in the saddle. So I thanked the dean for his help, but told him that I would be okay on my own. I did not go to a rehab. 2 weeks later, I walked through a second-story window. After insulting the emergency room personnel, I slipped into unconsciousness, where I remained for 5 days. I awoke in a neck brace with complete double vision. My parents were furious. I was flown home and the future looked bleak. God's timing, however, is impeccable. My college had a long history of drinkers, including Dr. Bob. At the time of my accident, the deans were assessing how to respond to student alcohol abuse and were waiting to try out their latest idea, Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the test case. They told me in no uncertain terms that I would never get back into this college unless I went to AA. Under that pressure, I went to my first meeting. Looking back, that may have been the first healthy decision I ever made with respect to alcohol. One definition of a bottom is the point when the last thing you lost or the next thing you are about to lose is more important to you than booze. That point is different for everyone, and some of us die before we get there. For me, though, it was clear I was willing to do anything to get back into school. I went to my first AA meeting with absolutely no idea what AA was about. I am from a large Irish Catholic family and have had several relatives in and out of the program. AA, like prison, was shameful, however, and was never discussed. I also had no idea what alcoholism was. I remember a girlfriend once told me that her mother had a drinking problem, but that she was not an alcoholic. Curious, I asked what the difference was. An alcoholic, she told me, is someone who needs to drink alcohol every day, even if it is only one drink. A person who or a person with a drinking problem does not have to drink every day, but once she starts, she cannot stop. By that definition, I was an alcoholic with a drinking problem. I was surprised by my first meeting. It was in a church, and whatever I was expected, or whatever I had expected, it was not this. The room was filled with well-dressed, smiling, happy people. No rancid coats or 3-day beards. No bloodshot eyes, wheezing cough, or shaky hands. But laughter. Someone was talking about God. I was sure I was in the wrong place. Then a woman introduced herself and said that she was an alcoholic. I knew then I was in AA. She spoke about feelings of insecurity, replaced by confidence, fear replaced by faith, resentment replaced by love, and despair replaced by joy. I knew those feelings. I had insecurity, fear, resentment, and despair. I had not believed it. Here was a person who was happy. It seemed like a long time since I had seen one of those. After the meeting, people welcomed me with open arms and gave me their telephone numbers. The discussion meeting was followed by a speaker meeting where I had my first awakening in AA. The speaker said, "If you're an apple, you can be the best apple you can be, but you can never be an orange." I was an apple, all right, and for the first time I understood that I had spent my life trying to be an orange. I looked around at a room filled with apples, and if I was understanding the speaker, most of them were no longer trying to be an orange, or trying to be oranges. Sorry. My progress in AA, however, was slow. I refused to go to meetings outside of my neighborhood, which meant that I went only Tuesday and Thursday nights. I always felt better after a meeting. I remember times when something upsetting would happen on a Friday, and I would tell myself I wish it were Tuesday so I could go to the meeting. No matter how many suggestions I heard and how many rides were offered, however, I simply would not go to meetings on those other nights. People so gave me many other good suggestions as well. They suggested that I stay out of relationships. I was young and single, and I rejected this idea out of hand. For the first year, I bounced from one sick relationship to another. They suggested that I get a sponsor. I had no idea what a sponsor was and was too proud to ask. But I was sure I didn't need one. After all, I was smarter than the rest of these people. They might need someone to tell them how to run their lives, but double vision, neck brace, and all, I was doing just fine on my own. People suggested that I find a higher power. I was not fooled. I knew when they said higher power, they meant God. And I knew that God waited for me to step out of line just once so that he could take his revenge. I wanted no part of God. With this resistance, I plodded along for a few months. Whenever people asked how had I or how hard I was crying inside, I lost my spot. Okay. With this resistance, I plodded along for a few months. Whenever people asked me how I was doing, I would say, fine, just fine, no matter how hard I was crying inside. Then I reached the crossroads. I was sober about 6 months and I was not getting any better. I contemplated suicide almost every day. My emotions swung between paralyzing despair and murderous rage, often in the space of a single moment. I was not happy, joyous, or free. I was miserable and I was sick of it. I decided I had had enough. I went to my Tuesday night meeting, fully intent on sharing honestly. I arrived at the meeting and no one else was there. This meeting, which routinely numbered 20 people, was empty. I waited for a few minutes and was prepared to leave when a man whom I barely knew walked through the door. He suggested that he and I have a meeting. I was sure it was a bad idea. He asked me how I was doing. That was all I needed. The pain, fear, misery, anger, loss, resentment, and despair came pouring out. For the next 45 minutes, I talked at this man who who continued to nod his head, smile, and say, yeah, I remember feeling that way. For the first human being, I showed someone who I really was without fear or of rejection. I took an action that was designed to make me feel, rather than just look, better. I was met with acceptance and love. When I had finished talking, he told me something simple. You don't have to drink over it. What an idea. I had thought that situations made me drink. If I was angry, I drank. If I was happy, I drank. Bored or excited, elated or depressed, I drank. Here was a man telling me that, independent of my life situation, I did not have to drink. If I stuck with AA, I could stay sober under any and all conditions. He gave me hope, and in many ways, he symbolized the door through which I finally walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. I began to change, I began to pray, I began actively and became actively involved in working the steps. I had previously dismissed them as a tool of mental inferiors. Now I embrace them as the rungs on the ladder to salvation. I began working with a sponsor and became active in my home group. I did not understand how making coffee or cleaning up after meetings could have anything to do with staying sober. But older members told me that service would keep me sober. So I tried it. It worked. My life began to change just before my first anniversary. I was readmitted readmitted to college. I arrived back on campus terrified. All I had known there was drinking. How was I ever going to stay sober under these conditions? The answer was simple. I threw myself into AA. Some very loving people took me under their wings. I had the opportunity to perform a fair amount of 12-step work with other students. And by the time I graduated, there was a thriving AA community at the school. After graduation, I attended law school. I arrived to find an AA that was very different from that to which I had grown accustomed. I was sure I would get drunk because those people weren't doing it right. My sponsor back at college, aware of my propensity for finding fault, assured me that if my new friends were not doing it right, it was my obligation to show them how. So I did. Driven by fear and conceit, I set out to remark AA in my image. I am certain that if membership had depended upon being liked, I would have been expelled. After some time, I called my sponsor to report my progress. He stopped me short with a simple question. These people who aren't doing it right, are they staying sober? I admitted that, despite their failings, they were staying sober. Good, he said. You have told them that AA or what AA is. Now it's time for you to listen to figure out how they are staying sober. I followed that suggestion and began to listen. Slowly but surely, some wisdom of humility began to creep in. I became more teachable. I found God working all around me, where previously I was sure I had been alone. When I opened my eyes enough to see the miracle, I found that it was right in front of my face. I was growing in God's love. I was fortunate to have an opportunity to spend time abroad during law school. That was something I had dreamed of doing while drinking. But when push came to shove, I drank. Now sober, I've been in meetings in probably a dozen countries and have always been amazed at the message that transcends all linguistic, if I said that right, and cultural differences. There is a solution. Together we can live soberly, joyously, and freely. My life has been one of great joy. I am now 33 years old, and God willing, in 1 month I will celebrate my 14th sober AA anniversary. I am surrounded by loving friends on whom I depend and who depend on me. I've reconciled with my parents, from whom I had been estranged. My life is filled with laughter again, something that alcohol had taken away. I was married shortly after my 9th anniversary to a loving woman who, 1 week before my 20th anniversary, our son was born. Through him, I learned more about unconditional love, the value of wonder, and the sheer joy of being alive. I have a wonderful job that most days I appreciate. I am active in AA service work and have both a sponsor and several sponsees with whom it is a privilege to work. All of those are gifts from God. I express my gratitude by enjoying them. I once knew a woman who was crying before a meeting. She was approached by a 5-year-old girl who told her, "You don't have to cry here. This is a good place." They took my daddy and they made him better. That is exactly what AA did for me. It took me and it made me better. For that, I am internally grateful. And like I said, beginning of the meeting, service work. It's all about service work. And it's why I do these meetings, for my service work. For you and for me. Because through me living sober, I don't take any of my days for granted, because it's not promised that I will be sober later. And we're told that so that way we always remember that you don't have to have that drink. You don't have to have that fear to yourself. You don't have to have all those problems by yourself. And in the steps, it tells you to keep working them and don't give up on working your steps, and just know that you're not alone. You feel like you are, but you're not. One thing I've learned for me is me being alone for a while and having time to think for myself. I do need to go to more meetings. I do need to work my steps every day. I need to not set myself for failure, which is something that a lot of us do. when we first come in there. Now, the other day, on Tuesday, on the same topic, because it is AA here, I said something about my son, my oldest son, and my reaction, his reaction. It hurt. That's what I can say. It hurt. It hurt me, it hurt him, and really it wasn't worth it. I can admit it, and I have admitted it, and I admitted it to him yesterday. That, yeah, I have that flaw. I have that part that is still there. I'm still who I am. I'm still your mom. I'm still worried about things, and, reflecting the other day about it. I did the same thing to my parents, and so yes, I can understand why they were upset when I said that I took somebody's last name and put it somewhere when I was not married, and I did the same thing to my son. But I'm a mom of 2 boys, and it's hard to let them go and let them be adults and let them make decisions for themselves. And sometimes, yeah, I do still need to have that wake up, He is an adult and he's going to go and live his life how he wants to. I can't shelter him any longer. I can't blame him for choosing what he blames or what he had chosen, because it's wonderful what he's doing. He has a loving girlfriend. He has his son and he has his daughter, and I just need to be happy for that because it makes him happy. Yes, it took me reading my sponsor's own words, which is another thing that we're told to do, is get your sponsor. I got my sponsor before I ever went to my second meeting. I grew up knowing that I had alcoholics in my family. On both sides, not just one side, on both sides, all 3 sides, I should say. And I did do what he did in the story. As you all know, I did basically, I ended up in an emergency room. I was drunk. I had a busted my eye open. And I remember fighting with this lady in a room. They put me in with my husband and my youngest son, and I fought them. I don't know how long I fought them to let me out of that room, or to let me out. And sorry about my phone. That was my first time admitting that I was an alcoholic to myself. So I went sober for a year, and I set myself up. A lot of us do. Like, oh, it's been a year, let's go ahead and see if I can drink this. I'm here to tell you, you don't start all over. You start where you've done left off. And it's not fun. It's bottom. That's where you are. Right at the bottom. And
Hey, cool.
for a college student to go through that and then learn to use his service work to help others the way that we're meant to help others in this journey of sobriety. It's a life lesson. And hey, KT, thank you for coming. But it is a lesson for all of us alcoholics that you don't have to drink just because you're scared, just because something's exciting's happening, just because there's a change. Change is one of my enemies. I hate changes. I hate it with a passion. But with the change in life, I have to also go with it. As hard as it is, I still have to go with it. It only makes you stronger. Makes you realize that what that unconditional love really is. My kids are that. My grandkids are that. My kids both graduated high school. They dropped out when they were in actual high school, but they graduated high school. That was my proudest days. They did it. And now, if the future holds cards, how my son wants his cards to go, I will be a mom-in-law. And I accept her for her. And, I just don't want to be excluded from that exciting day when they say I do. I didn't think it would come to the way it is, and it's just amazing to have the things that most look forward to in life, and I could have lost it all. But instead, I chose to get sober, and I chose it for me. Not because my kids wanted me to, not because my spouse wanted me to, not because my friends asked me to, not for my parents. I did it all for me. I go through every day sober for me. To be that better me that doesn't rely on that alcohol to make me who I have always been. To live and let live. And that's all we can do is stay in our moment of always reminding ourselves that we can't go back out. It's not wise. Not wise at all, because sometimes you don't come back. And then you hear that somebody has passed on from whatever, and there's nothing we can do except for reach the next one. And here I am doing exactly my service work. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If there's rude comments, I will delete them. If there's any harassment, I'll report it. That's my oldest that just messaged me. But sobriety is worth it. You get to see things in life that you maybe wouldn't have seen. And for me, that is my kid graduating, being a grandma, my oldest and my youngest having a life that they deserve, that they've longed for. They can do it. And so can you. And if you're struggling today, just know you're not alone. We all have our struggles. We all have our flaws. It is a part of life. But we don't need to have the alcohol ever. And I've learned that. But anyways, thank you guys for coming and being here. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe and put the notification bell. All it will do is alert you when I'm doing another AA meeting, because I usually only go live for AA. I do other videos and stuff, but not really live streams, unless if I'm fishing or what have you. And but yeah. And if you're watching the replay, I see you. And thank you for being here. And please reach out to any church. Google search AA meetings. They're everywhere. Literally everywhere. And I'm going to go ahead and get off here, eat my dinner, and go to bed. So, I love you guys. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Love you guys.